Welcome to this episode of Arcana Orbis, the secrets of the world. This time we shall dig into the escalating and very much infected debate about who really wrote Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet and all the other renowned plays which have been unabatedly staged all over the world up to this day. Were they single-handedly crafted by the bard, this alleged genius by the name William Shakespeare? Though this debate started in the early 19th century, the American novelist Samuel Clemens, who wrote under his pseudonym Mark Twain, was one of the first really famous persons to challenge this firmly established idea that a simple man from Stratford-upon-Avon could have been the author of such a vast body of plays and poems. Another equally famous man to contest this uneducated but genius narrative was the scientist and psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud. Gradually, both famous and not so famous people came forward and disputed the whole Shakespeare authorship idea and the commercialization of everything surrounding the name William Shakespeare. Today, there is a growing number of contenders, of which some are writing books and others gathers allies, defenders, pleaders and even henchmen on their internet sites and on talk shows on TV. There has even, quite recently, been released a full feature movie with many of today's greatest names in the movie entertainment. And this film seriously putting Shakespeare as the author to the test. And it has more and more becoming a lucrative business to criticize the whole Shakespeare industry. What about the different parties and ways to tackle this authorship question? Firstly, we have the so-called Stratfordians who firmly believe that the bard came from Stratford-upon-Avon and died there as a fairly wealthy merchant after a lifetime as an actor and a playwright. Secondly, we have all those who claim a specific historical individual as the real author. And the Lord Chancellor and early scientist Sir Francis Bacon is one, and the 17th Earl of Oxford, Edward de Vere, and the playwright Christopher Marlowe are the other more prominent contenders for the title the real author of the Shakespeare plays. Thirdly, there are those who seriously doubt that Shakespeare wrote the plays but who doesn't see it as their task to stress another name as the real author. In this field of uncertainty, there are those who are absolutely certain that everything is about an informing and a tutoring agenda to teach the common people about culture, philosophy and English history. And also that the plays were supposedly containing information to and from the government. This party also means that everything is about esoteric phenomenon such as spying, clandestine operations, ciphers, codes, occultism, alchemy, spiritism, hermetism and the new natural philosophy. In this area we have Sir Francis Walsingham, who created the Secret Service and who used the playwright Christopher Marlowe as a spy and double agent. In the center of all this was also Dr. John Dee, who was the Queen's astronomer, astrologer and navigator. He was also a mathematician, spiritist, occultist and a passionate imperialist, which served the Queen's interests well. To get a balanced view over this three-way dispute, we must see how the traditional life story of Shakespeare goes, though this narrative is for the most part unsubstantiated according to the encyclopedias. William was born in Stratford-upon-Avon 1564 as a son to a glover. He went to King's New School up to the age of 11, when he finished formal education forever. Here he learned Latin via the classical authors. When he was 18, he married Anne Hathaway, and 3 months later they had the daughter Susanna. 2 years later they got the twins Hamnet and Judith. Then, after this, came his so-called lost years. There is a theory of a poaching allegation at a manor nearby Stratford, which would have forced him to escape the small town for London. In 1592, he entered the theatre stage in London, and he started to write plays in which he also acted. In 1597, he purchased the second largest house in Stratford, and in 1599 he became a partner in the Globe Theatre Company. Then, in 1608, the Globe partners bought the Blackfriars Indoor Theatre. All this time he was an actor, merchant and a playwright, and he was dividing his time between London and Stratford upon Avon, and during his days in London he moved around, and after some years he bought a gatehouse in Blackfriars Priory. Then, at the end of his life, he moved to his house in Stratford. Here he died in 1616 and was buried in the Holy Trinity Church 2 days after his death. The firmly rooted notion that the man from Stratford-upon-Avon was the author of successful plays such as Midsummer Night's Dream is the more accepted stance among academics and in the theatre establishment. Since they got the interpretative privilege, let's take a look on some of the facts which are used by the so-called anti-Stratfordians, or simply doubters. 1. Not a single literary document exists from Shakespeare's hand, except from 6 extremely poorly written signatures of a man who called himself Will Shakespeare. 2. The Will Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon never used the name Shakespeare. 3. Not one document exists that make a reference to an author named Will Shakespeare. 4. The top evidence the Stratfordian traditionalists claim is that the plays were published under the name Shakespeare, which is indisputable, though not a single evidence shows that they were written by Shakespeare. There is a body of circumstantial evidence against Shakespeare as the author in question. Let's take a look on some of it. A young man who, without a higher education, became the venerated genius with a fantasy akin to the Encyclopedia Britannica after finishing school at the age of 11. Shakespeare is the only assumed writer of his time for whom there is no contemporary evidence of a career as a playwright. Nor a single person or a group did write anything when William Shakespeare died 1616. Even though he is supposed to have been the greatest playwright of them all. Not one single elegy or tribute was given in print or by hand over him, neither as Shakespeare or as Shakespeare, though he is supposed to have been the leading dramatist of the troupe The King's Men. From where did Shakespeare get his enormous vocabulary? He variated his plays in 15,000 different words, which is by far more than in any other play at this time. And as a comparison, the Bible uses a little over 5,000 words. Now, let's look closer on the top 2 of the serious contenders for the title The Real Author of the Shakespeare Plays. First out is Sir Francis Bacon, who was the first alternative name as the author. There are those who are absolutely confident that Shakespeare was a paid frontman for Bacon, who had a supposedly dangerous political agenda and thus hid codes in his manuscripts, poems and plays. Francis Bacon was the leading cryptograph of his time, and he invented the precursor of the binary code used in computers today. So, what about the evidence? 1. The works of Shakespeare show a detailed scientific knowledge that only Bacon could have possessed. 2. The introduction in the first folio, 1626, by the dramatist Ben Jonson is containing the very code invented by Bacon, and it is showing where the name Bacon is hidden in the folio several times. 3. The code used in the first folio is clearly described in Bacon's famous work The Advancement of Learning from 1602. 4. The Northumberland manuscript, found in the possessions of Francis Bacon, is full of obvious experimentation and tryouts of the name William Shakespeare. 5. He wrote in a letter to King James that he was a, quote, concealed poet. The other contender as the author is Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, and we shall look at some of the few examples out of the enormous body of facts his advocates are presenting as evidence. 1. Though it was absolutely taboo for members of the court to write poems and plays, the tutor and translator William Webb names Oxford as the most excellent of Elizabeth's courtier poets. 2. He had a deep interest in the theatre throughout his whole life, and he sponsored his own troops, the Oxford's Men and the Oxford's Boys. 3. He travelled through Europe and had first-hand knowledge of very much of the things occurring in the so-called Italian plays. He visited Venice, Padua, Milan, Genoa, Palermo, Florence, Siena and Naples, and probably passed through Messina, Mantua and Verona, all cities used as settings in the plays. 4. He knew about things which only people at court could have known about. Things like falconing and esoteric unwritten codes and courtly manners. He was well versed in judicial terminology, which are frequent in the plays. 6. His family had been in the core of English history, hence the deep knowledge about kings, wars, politics and foreign affairs in his historical plays. 7. In Italy, Edward de Vere played in a performance by the Commedia dell'arte troupe in Venice 1575, and his role was named Lord Oxford, and he got, quote, a spear of sorts to shake. 8. The name Shakespeare was often parted with an hyphen, Shakespeare. In coded form, on the front page on the big book Minerva Britannia from 1612 by Henry Peacham, Minerva is in this case Shakespeare, since Minerva is the Roman equivalent to the Greek goddess Pallas Athena. She is also known as the Spear Shaker. This book print is showing the anagram mente videborius. Changing the letters gives the Latin word devere non tibium, which in English is devere is your name. In combination with the headline we get England's Spear Shaker, devere is your name. Even though encyclopedias like Wikipedia and the Swedish National Encyclopedia initially admits that most of the life of Shakespeare is merely built on probabilities and conjectures, they continue to tell the tradition about his life propagated by, among others, the founders of the Birthplace Trust. This shows the prerogative that the established narrative has on the academic world. How about conspirators and conspiracy theorists on this battleground? If we reasonably can assert that those who doubt the authorship of the plays are conspiracy theorists, is it not condign and fair to say conspirators about those who built a whole life story out of no written records and physical evidence of his life? In addition, there is 3 compelling facts from the beginning of the Stratford Shakespeare industry adding to the so-called conspiracy theory. Firstly, The house where Shakespeare is said to have been born was taken as an example of how his birthplace may have looked like. Secondly, the epitaph or bust of Shakespeare in the church was obviously replaced in the late 18th century. And thirdly, the first engraved stone slab over his grave was replaced in the 19th century, and the stone laying there today looks very different from the original. And most compelling of it all, it doesn't say anything of whom it is in the grave under it. If someone did prove that someone else wrote these plays, what would happen? If it became clear that it wasn't the venerated, poorly educated genius we have become so accustomed to, then what? Is this conflict just a storm in a glass of water? Or could the plays hide codes and maps and secrets to persons, events, places and dangerous ideas which had to be buried deep to prevent from being suppressed once again? There are those which have ideas about a collaboration of writers, an idea which they say could explain a lot about these plays. Ideas that would liberate mankind from the slavery under religion, the ruling elite and from illiteracy. One should remember that this was the moment in time when science was born, and when the established religion was losing its firm grip over everyone, everywhere, and we see secular, humanistic movements and secret societies emerging on the horizon. First out was Pierre de Ronsard and the French group of poets La Pléiade. They were possibly the inspiration for the elusive RC Brotherhood, which in their turn was the ideological forerunner of the Freemason outburst and the German Illuminati in the 18th century. In England, in the late 16th century, new secret societies and organizations started, like the School of Night and the Secret Service, which were based on advanced ciphers. So, is it of any significance really if Shakespeare wrote the plays or not? Will Baconians and Oxfordians ever get a wider acceptance from the media and from the normal, average audience in the world? What is the reasons behind the advocates for these two noblemen as the real names behind the alias William Shakespeare? And why is it so important for the doubters to bring attention to the public that this is a case of reasonable doubt? Is it all about the truth? With all of this in mind, some contradictory questions arise. Was a nobleman daring enough to write theatre plays? Was the Shakespeare plays collaboration by a surreptitious group of high-placed and well-educated men with a multitude of agendas through the long reign of Queen Elizabeth? Or was it all mere entertainment?